Why do the tensions between Israel and Iran feel like they've been around forever? The real story isn't just political. It goes back thousands of years to two brothers, a divine promise, and a rivalry that has shaped the Middle East to this day. What does this ancient story tell us about the world today? In this video, we're going to explore the roots of the Israel-Iran conflict. At the heart of this battle lies a biblical story, one of two brothers, Isaac and Ishmael, whose descendants still fight for land and identity. It's not just a historical narrative. It's a story of faith, division, and the promise of reconciliation. We'll uncover how the division between Isaac and Ishmael continues to influence geopolitical struggles today, and more importantly, how this ancient rift calls us to reflect on our own relationships and role in fostering peace. Let's dive deeper into this compelling story that transcends time and still impacts us today. 1. The promise to Abraham and its dividing impact. The story of Israel's struggle is deeply rooted in the promises made to Abraham. In Genesis 12, God calls Abraham to leave his homeland, his family, and all that he knows, with the promise that he will make him the father of a great nation. I will make you into a great nation, and I will bless you. This divine promise is one of the most significant moments in biblical history, for it sets the course for the future of not just one nation, but two, and ultimately the entire world. However, this promise would not come to fruition immediately. As time passed, Abraham and his wife Sarah, both advanced in age, grew impatient with God's timing. Sarah, unable to conceive, suggested that Abraham father a child through her maidservant Hagar in an attempt to help God fulfill his promise. The result was the birth of Ishmael, Abraham's firstborn son. But this decision to take matters into their own hands, driven by impatience, would ultimately set the stage for a conflict that has lasted millennia. While Ishmael was indeed blessed by God, he was not the son of the promise. God had other plans for Abraham and Sarah. When Abraham was 100 years old and Sarah was 90, the promised child Isaac was born. Isaac was the son through whom God's covenant would be established. He was the heir to the promises God made to Abraham. The birth of Isaac, however, brought tension. Isaac's birth marked a distinct shift, creating a rift within the family. The presence of Ishmael, the son of the maidservant, was no longer seen as part of God's plan. This story illustrates the danger of impatience with God's timing. Though Abraham and Sarah thought they were helping God fulfill his promises, they instead created a long-lasting division. Ishmael, while blessed, became the symbol of a path that was not part of the divine plan for the chosen people. This division wasn't just personal, it would echo through the generations, setting the stage for centuries of conflict. Spiritually, this story teaches us about the consequences of trying to take control of God's plans when we feel his timing is slow. Our impatience can often lead to actions that, while well-intentioned, have far-reaching consequences. Just as Abraham and Sarah's decision created a divide between their sons, our choices, when we act outside of God's will, can create division and lasting impact. As Christians, we are called to trust in God's timing and plan, even when we don't understand it. Abraham's journey is one of faith and trust, but it is also a story of human error. God's promises will come to pass, but his ways are not always our ways. Our impatience can lead us to make decisions that, while seemingly helpful in the moment, ultimately create obstacles that delay the fulfillment of his promises. The story of Isaac and Ishmael reminds us that God's plans are always bigger than our understanding, and that while his promises are sure, they are often fulfilled in ways that require patience and trust. The divide between Isaac and Ishmael, born out of human impatience, serves as a reminder to surrender our will to God's greater purpose, trusting that his plan for us will unfold at the right time, just as his plan for Abraham did. This division between Isaac and Ishmael would set the stage for a conflict that continues to this day, but it also offers us a crucial lesson in faith. Trusting God's timing is not just a call to wait, but a call to trust in the greater plan he has for our lives. 2. The birth of conflict. Isaac versus Ishmael. The birth of Isaac, the promised child, marked the beginning of a new chapter in Abraham's life and the fulfillment of God's covenant. However, it also ignited a deep-seated conflict between Isaac and Ishmael, one that would echo throughout history. The tension between the two brothers wasn't just a personal matter. It symbolized a spiritual and ideological divide that would influence entire nations. From the moment Isaac was born, a subtle but growing rivalry began to take shape. Ishmael, although Abraham's firstborn, was not the child of God's promise. As Isaac grew, the distinction between the two brothers became clearer. Isaac, the child of Abraham's wife Sarah, was the legitimate heir to the divine covenant. Ishmael, born out of a decision driven by impatience and doubt, represented a different path, a path not aligned with God's ultimate promise. In Genesis 16:11-12, God spoke over Ishmael, saying, "He will be a wild donkey of a man. His hand will be against everyone, and everyone's hand against him." This prophecy foreshadowed a life marked by conflict. Ishmael would live in resistance, at odds with his brothers and with the world. His descendants, though blessed, would inherit a legacy of struggle, and this tension between brothers, one born of promise, the other of impatience, would set the stage for centuries of division. The tension reached a breaking point when Ishmael mocked Isaac, a moment that ignited Sarah's fear. She demanded that Abraham send Hagar and Ishmael away, fearing the threat Ishmael posed to Isaac's inheritance. Abraham, torn between his love for both sons, was reluctant, but God intervened, reassuring him that he would protect Ishmael and make him into a great nation as well. Yet the damage was done. The division between Isaac and Ishmael became permanent. This separation wasn't just physical, it was spiritual. The choice to expel Ishmael from the family set the trajectory for two distinct paths. Isaac's descendants, the Israelites, would become the chosen people, inheriting God's covenant and blessings, while Ishmael's descendants, the Arabs, would be excluded from that promise. While God's blessing remained with both sons, the spiritual inheritance, the divine covenant, was with Isaac and his descendants. For us, this story holds deep spiritual significance. It is a reminder of the consequences of decisions made out of impatience and fear. Sarah's decision to take matters into her own hands, trying to force God's promise, ultimately led to division and strife. The conflict between Isaac and Ishmael represents the tension between following God's plan and attempting to control our own destiny. This tension between the brothers continues to this day, with the descendants of Isaac and Ishmael representing two divergent paths, one of promise and covenant, the other of resistance and struggle. As Christians, we are called to reflect on how we respond to God's promises. Do we trust in His timing, or do we try to force our own solutions? The division between Isaac and Ishmael teaches us the importance of surrendering our plans to God, trusting that His promises will be fulfilled in His way and at His time. The story of Isaac and Ishmael also invites us to examine how we respond to spiritual exclusion and rivalry. Just as Isaac and Ishmael were divided by a promise, we too often face situations where divisions arise over spiritual beliefs, political ideologies, or personal preferences. Are we, like Isaac, willing to stand firm in God's calling, or are we, like Ishmael, resistant to God's plan for us? In the end, the story of these brothers, marked by conflict and division, calls us to reflect on how we live out God's promises and how we deal with the divisions in our own lives. Are we fostering reconciliation, or are we allowing rivalry and resentment to deepen the divisions between us? 3. The separation of brothers. Ishmael, cast out. The separation of Isaac and Ishmael marks one of the most profound moments in the biblical narrative. It is not just a physical separation, but a symbolic one that echoes through generations. As the tensions between Isaac and Ishmael reached a breaking point, Sarah, fearing the potential threat Ishmael posed to Isaac's inheritance, demanded that Abraham cast out Hagar and Ishmael from their home. This decision, though heart-wrenching for Abraham, was the beginning of a deep spiritual division that would shape the future of their descendants. In Genesis 21, 9-12, we read about Sarah's distress as she witnessed Ishmael mocking Isaac. This moment of jealousy and fear set in motion a difficult choice for Abraham. Although Abraham loved Ishmael as his firstborn son, God reassured him, saying, "Do not be so distressed about the boy and your slave woman. Listen to whatever Sarah tells you, because it is through Isaac that your offspring will be reckoned." God's instruction was clear. Isaac, not Ishmael, was to be the child of promise. With a heavy heart, Abraham obeyed God's command and sent Hagar and Ishmael away into the desert. This act of sending Ishmael away was not just an emotional separation, but a significant spiritual and prophetic moment. Ishmael's descendants would be excluded from the covenantal promise God had made with Abraham, while Isaac's descendants would inherit the blessings of the divine covenant. Despite God's blessings on Ishmael, the line of promise would flow through Isaac, creating a lasting divide. The separation between Isaac and Ishmael symbolizes a deeper spiritual truth. It highlights the reality that following God's plan often involves painful decisions, especially when they lead to divisions. Abraham was forced to choose between his love for his son Ishmael and his obedience to God's will, which in this case was the establishment of Isaac as the chosen heir. This act of obedience, though filled with sorrow, set the foundation for the future of two nations, Israel and the Arab world. Spiritually, this division reflects the tension between divine promises and human efforts. The conflict between the brothers did not arise from a lack of love or an unwillingness to reconcile. Instead, it was rooted in the broader spiritual struggle to fulfill God's purpose. While both sons were blessed, only Isaac carried the promise of God's covenant. This division, though painful, was necessary to fulfill God's plan for his people. It serves as a reminder that God's purposes are often higher than our understanding, and that following his plan may not always bring immediate peace or resolution. For us as Christians, this story calls us to reflect on how we deal with division in our own lives. Are we, like Sarah, willing to make difficult decisions when they align with God's will, even if they cause temporary separation or conflict? Are we ready to trust that God's plan for us is greater than our desire for immediate resolution? The story of Isaac and Ishmael teaches us that obedience to God's will, even when it leads to difficult outcomes, ultimately serves a greater purpose. The separation of the two brothers also speaks to the ongoing tension that exists today between their descendants. The spiritual divide between the children of Isaac and Ishmael has evolved into a geopolitical struggle that shapes much of the Middle East's conflict. However, this story is not just about the past. It offers profound lessons for the present and future. It teaches us that reconciliation and peace are not easily achieved, but they begin with accepting God's plan, even when it challenges our desires and expectations. In our own lives, we must ask ourselves, how do we handle divisions that arise in our relationships or communities? Do we cling to our own desires for unity at all costs? Or do we trust that God's ultimate plan will bring about true reconciliation in his time? 4. The birth of two nations, Israel and the Arab world. The separation of Isaac and Ishmael was not just a personal or familial conflict. It was the beginning of the formation of two nations that would shape the course of history. From Isaac, the child of promise, would come the nation of Israel, chosen to carry the covenant that God had established with Abraham. From Ishmael, the son born out of human impatience, would arise a vast and powerful Arab world. These two nations, though related, would become bitter rivals, each claiming a right to the land and the legacy of their father, Abraham. In Genesis 17:19-21, God makes it clear that his covenant would be established through Isaac, saying, "But God said, 'Your wife Sarah will bear you a son, and you will call him Isaac. I will establish my covenant with him as an everlasting covenant for his descendants after him.'" This declaration set the spiritual path for Israel, the descendants of Isaac, to become the people chosen to reveal God's glory to the world. Through Isaac's son Jacob, later renamed Israel, the 12 tribes were formed, leading to the establishment of the nation of Israel. On the other side, Ishmael's descendants formed a great multitude of nations, spanning across the Middle East and North Africa. Although God blessed Ishmael and promised to make him a great nation, the covenant of promise remained with Isaac. This difference set the stage for the geopolitical conflicts that continue to shape the region today. The nations descended from Ishmael, particularly the Arab nations, have often been in opposition to Israel, leading to a complex and ongoing struggle over land, identity, and faith. The creation of these two nations, Israel and the Arab world, represents more than just historical events. It speaks to the broader spiritual and theological issues that underlie their ongoing conflicts. The root of the division lies in the promises and covenants established by God. The spiritual inheritance of Isaac, passed down through the generations, became the foundation for the identity of Israel. Ishmael, though blessed, was excluded from this divine promise, which created a deep spiritual divide that continues to resonate today. This divide has played out in both spiritual and territorial ways. Israel's claim to the Promised Land, particularly Jerusalem, has been contested by the Arab nations, many of whom trace their heritage back to Ishmael. The land, promised to Isaac and his descendants, has become a focal point for much of the tension in the Middle East. For the descendants of Ishmael, this represents not only a territorial dispute, but also a spiritual struggle for recognition and legitimacy. The struggle for land and sovereignty is intertwined with the question of God's divine promise, which has never been fully accepted by all those descended from Abraham. For us as Christians, the story of Isaac and Ishmael offers valuable lessons about the nature of divine promises and the consequences of human decisions. God's promises are often long-lasting and carry profound implications for entire generations. When we fail to wait on God's timing or try to force His plan through our own impatience, we risk creating division and conflict that can last for centuries. The story of Isaac and Ishmael also reminds us that spiritual inheritance and calling are not determined by human desires or actions, but by God's sovereign will. The ongoing conflict between Israel and the Arab nations is not just a political issue. It is a continuation of the division that began with these two brothers. As Christians, we must understand that the struggle for peace in this region is not merely about borders or territory. It is also about a deep spiritual struggle for the rightful claim to God's promises. We are called to pray for reconciliation and peace in this region, recognizing that true peace can only come when both sides acknowledge the deeper spiritual truths that have shaped their histories. In our own lives, we must ask, how do we respond to conflicts that have deep spiritual and historical roots? How do we, as believers, reconcile with those who have been divided for centuries? The story of Isaac and Ishmael challenges us to seek peace through understanding, forgiveness, and a recognition of God's ultimate plan for humanity. 5. The spiritual roots of conflict. Israel's right to the Promised Land. At the heart of the conflict between Israel and its neighbors is a profound spiritual question. Who has the right to the Promised Land? The land that God promised to Abraham and his descendants, specifically through Isaac, remains the focal point of the ongoing struggle in the Middle East. In Genesis 13:15, God tells Abraham, "All the land that you see I will give to you and your offspring forever." This promise has been central to the identity of the Jewish people and their connection to the land, especially Jerusalem, which holds deep religious significance for Jews, Christians, and Muslims alike. For centuries, the descendants of Isaac, the Jews, have maintained a claim to this land, believing it to be part of God's eternal covenant with them. This divine promise was passed down from Abraham to Isaac, and then to Isaac's son Jacob, who was later named Israel. Through him, the 12 tribes of Israel were formed, and the Jewish people became the inheritors of God's covenant. The land of Israel, therefore, represents not only a place of habitation, but a spiritual inheritance, deeply connected to their identity as God's chosen people. However, the promise of this land to the descendants of Isaac has been contested for millennia, especially by the descendants of Ishmael. The Arabs, descended from Ishmael, have their own historical and spiritual claims to the land, especially in regions like Jerusalem. This competition for the land has led to a deep-rooted rivalry, both territorial and theological, with each side asserting their connection to the same sacred land. Theologically, the conflict is about more than physical territory. It's about the fulfillment of God's promises and the question of who holds the spiritual inheritance that was promised to Abraham. The descendants of Ishmael, though blessed by God, were not the chosen line through which the divine covenant would be established. This theological division has caused a rift that persists today, as the land continues to be a symbol of both divine favor and spiritual legitimacy. This conflict also raises important questions about God's sovereignty and His purposes. As Christians, we believe that God's promises are unchanging, and that His plan for the land, as well as for the people of Israel, will be fulfilled in His time. While the territorial struggles continue, the ultimate question of who owns the land is not just a political issue. It is a matter of God's divine will. The land belongs to God, and He has chosen to give it to the descendants of Isaac. This divine right, however, does not negate the legitimate grievances of the descendants of Ishmael, who also feel entitled to the land. The challenge for us as Christians is to understand that this conflict is not just about borders or nations, it is deeply spiritual. It is about God's covenant with His people and the ways in which human history and human choices have played out in the pursuit of that promise. While the political and territorial aspects of the conflict are significant, we must also remember that God's plan involves more than human politics. It is ultimately about reconciliation, redemption, and the fulfillment of His promise to all nations. This spiritual perspective offers us both a challenge and an opportunity. As Christians, we are called to pray for peace, but we are also called to recognize the deeper spiritual truths at play. The land of Israel is sacred not only to the Jews but also to Christians, as it is the land where Jesus walked and carried out His ministry. Understanding the spiritual roots of this conflict allows us to approach it with greater empathy and wisdom. We are reminded that true peace cannot be achieved by force or political agreements alone. It requires a deep, heartfelt reconciliation that only God can bring. In our own lives, we must ask, how do we respond when conflicts arise over matters that feel spiritually significant? Are we willing to seek peace, not just through human means, but through prayer and a deeper understanding of God's will? The story of Israel's right to the Promised Land is a call to reflect on how we navigate our own spiritual and relational struggles, seeking God's wisdom and peace in all things. 6. Prophetic vision and the future of the conflict. As we reflect on the long-standing conflict between the descendants of Isaac and Ishmael, it's important to remember that God has not abandoned either side. While the struggle for the Promised Land continues, the Scriptures offer a prophetic vision that points toward a future of peace and reconciliation. In Isaiah 2:4, the prophet declares, "He will judge between the nations and will settle disputes for many peoples. They will beat their swords into plowshares and their spears into pruning hooks. Nation will not take up sword against nation, nor will they train for war anymore." This vision of peace, which speaks to the end of violence and the establishment of God's justice, is the ultimate hope for the conflict between Israel and its neighbors. This prophecy speaks not only to the future of the Middle East, but also to the ultimate reconciliation of all peoples under God's rule. The tension between Israel and the Arab world, especially the descendants of Ishmael, will not be resolved through political agreements alone. Rather, it will come through the intervention of the Prince of Peace, Jesus Christ, who will bring true justice, healing, and unity. As Christians, we believe that Christ's return will fulfill these prophecies, bringing peace not only to Israel but to the entire world. The idea of reconciliation is a central theme in the Bible. In Ephesians 2:14-16, Paul writes, "For He Himself is our peace, who has made the two groups one and has destroyed the barrier, the dividing wall of hostility." His purpose was to create in Himself one new humanity out of the two, thus making peace. This passage points to the ultimate work of Christ, reconciling both Jews and Gentiles, and by extension, reconciling all peoples to God. Through Christ's sacrifice, the hostility between Isaac and Ishmael, symbolized by division and conflict, will ultimately be overcome. What is now a deep spiritual and political divide will be healed by the Prince of Peace. For Christians, this prophecy is both a promise and a calling. While we wait for Christ's return, we are called to be peacemakers in the world. As Matthew 5:9 says, "Blessed are the peacemakers, for they will be called children of God." The work of reconciliation is not just reserved for the end times. It's something we are called to actively pursue now. We must seek peace not only in our personal lives, but also in the broader world, understanding that true peace comes from a relationship with God. We also must reflect on how we, as individuals and as the church, can be instruments of this reconciliation. As believers in Christ, we are called to share His message of love, forgiveness, and unity with those who are divided, including those who are caught in the ongoing struggle between Israel and its neighbors. While the political landscape of the Middle East may seem daunting and the path to peace unclear, we can still play a role in fostering understanding, compassion, and prayerful support for all those involved. The vision of peace in Isaiah is not just an abstract hope for the future. It is the culmination of God's plan for humanity, where division will be overcome and nations will live in harmony under the reign of Christ. As we look forward to this future, we are reminded of our role in the present. How can we bring the peace of Christ into our relationships, communities, and even the broader world? How can we help bridge divides and promote reconciliation, not only in the Middle East, but in our own lives? The promise of peace, though delayed, is assured in Christ. He will bring justice to the nations, and with it, true peace. As we wait for that day, we are called to be active participants in this vision of reconciliation, praying and working for peace wherever we are. Conclusion: a call to reconciliation and peace. As we conclude this journey through the story of Isaac and Ishmael, it's clear that the conflict between their descendants, Israel and the Arab world, is not merely political. It is deeply spiritual. This ancient division, rooted in the promises and choices of Abraham, continues to reverberate in our world today. The struggle for land, identity, and legitimacy is ultimately a struggle over God's covenant and His promises. But amid the division, the Scriptures offer us a profound hope, a future of reconciliation, peace, and unity under the Prince of Peace, Jesus Christ. As Christians, we are called to reflect on the deeper spiritual truths that underlie this conflict. It is not simply about choosing sides or claiming territory. It is about understanding God's greater plan of redemption for all peoples, regardless of background or history. The tension between Isaac and Ishmael, though seemingly insurmountable, points to the truth that reconciliation is possible, not through human effort alone, but through the grace and intervention of Christ. We are also reminded that our role as peacemakers doesn't just end with prayer. We are called to actively seek peace, to build bridges of understanding, and to embody Christ's message of love and forgiveness in every area of our lives. While we may not have the power to resolve political conflicts, we can influence the world through our words, actions, and prayers. Ultimately, the story of Isaac and Ishmael teaches us about the consequences of impatience and division, but also reveals the possibility of healing through God's timing and Christ's sacrifice. The spiritual reconciliation that the Bible promises, where nations lay down their weapons and come together in worship, is a vision that we must carry in our hearts, praying for its fulfillment. The day is coming when true peace will reign, not just in the Middle East, but across the entire world. As we reflect on these ancient struggles, let us ask ourselves, how can we contribute to God's plan of peace and reconciliation in our own lives and in the world around us? How can we, as followers of Christ, embody His message of unity, healing, and love? May we each play our part in building the peace that Christ promises, working toward the day when all divisions are healed and all nations come together to worship the true Prince of Peace.